and get those started. So welcome everybody for coming out tonight. The presentation tonight is going to be on Deno 2 specifically, but we're also going to be talking about some other JavaScript runtimes. And I just always start these things off saying that if anybody has an interest in future presentations, our next meeting is not going to be until January. But if you have something you're interested in presenting on, please let me know and I'll get you on the schedule. All right. Okay. Excuse me real quick. All right. All right. So one of the things I thought was interesting was, it used to be up until after 2009, there was really, one runtime for running JavaScript, on the server, on the desktop, outside of the browser, and that was Node.js. But now we've got a bunch of different runtimes for actually executing JavaScript, and there's some reasons for this. But one of the things I wanted to go ahead and just mention is that just JavaScript in general, next year will be the 30th anniversary of JavaScript, and it's hard to believe. But I remember when it got added to the Netscape browser. It's gone through a lot of changes since then, obviously, but it's going to mark a big milestone. So I think we're going to try to do something extra special for the 30th anniversary. With that, I was just going to mention that Node version 22, I'll be going to LTS here, I think in just the next couple of days. They just released the Node 23 branch. So there'll be simultaneous releases. 22 will become the long-term support branch. And Deno, of course, just went 2.0. Bun's also become a very popular runtime as well for running JavaScript. And Amazon recently introduced something called LLRT. And so one of the things, obviously Amazon, they have a cloud hosting business, and they like to be able to, execute things as quickly, as efficiently as possible. And one of the things they've been trying to do is figure out how can they reduce, start times. And so they actually have a project that's open source up on GitHub called LLRT, and it's actually based on the QuickJS engine. So there's a C library called QuickJS that you can integrate into your, your C++ projects, pretty easily. And what they've done is they've written a Rust binding around that and created a runtime that they can then run on, different Linux servers that are hosted in their environment, specifically for doing like, Lambda and Edge specific services. And so the nice thing right now is that there's actually a lot of competition between different JavaScript engines. And, Node, I think, still is kind of like the, big granddaddy of all the JavaScript runtimes, but there's a lot of competition now. And there's, everybody's claiming that they're faster than the other one. The real speed comparisons seem to be going between Deno and Bun. And Bun likes to show a bunch of these different, we're this many times faster than, Node for doing this, and we're faster than Deno for doing this. But the truth is they all kind of cherry pick, which things they run quickest at. But the main difference between these three frameworks is that Node and Deno are both based off of V8. So V8 is the the engine behind Chrome, and Node.js is at this point is a 15-year-old C++ project. And Rust, I'm sorry, not Rust. I meant to say Deno. Deno started off as being a Golang project, and they very quickly went back and re-engineered it using Rust. And part of the reason why is they've developed these Rust bindings around the V8 engine. But that whole project now essentially is written in Rust, and Bun's actually written with Zig. So There's a lot of different runtimes now, and they're written in different languages, but most of them use V8. Bun's the exception. Bun actually uses JavaScript Core, which is the JavaScript engine from Safari. Which brings us to Deno 2.
Hi, I'm Ryan Dahl. You might know me as the creator of Node.js. As a programmer, I like things that are simple. Really simple. Programming should be simple. That's why I created Node. But these days, Node is not simple. Just ask Rachel. She's been here for days.
Setting up TypeScript is an easy 47-step process. First, you take a tsconfig file here and add an ES in front of it. Comes a JavaScript target. Don't forget Al Gore.
And here's Steve commemorating the 20th test framework he's recently learned.
Please be gentle. Okay, I'm good.
Getting Node APIs to work in the browser can be frustrating. Security is also a nightmare. NPM packages have access to everything.
Come here.
But you can be a faster, more productive developer with Deno, the simplest way to program. Deno comes with TypeScript, all-in-one tooling, and web standard APIs, so you can write once and run anywhere.
Anywhere?
Anywhere. Deno is secure by default, so every dependency doesn't have full access to your computer. And you don't have to give up the packages you love from NPM. Yeah. And many more. So join hundreds of thousands of developers using Deno, because programming should be simple.
So that was a video they put out maybe about a week or so ago. They have like a full-on demonstration in this video. It's like an hour long, but I didn't want to play I just want to play the cold open because I thought it was amusing. They actually put some production into the intro video for Deno 2. So Deno is actually a newish type of framework. When I say newish, it's 6 years old as opposed to just being a 15-year-old project. It was started by Ryan Dahl, the guy we just watched in the video, who's also the inventor of Node.js. And what's interesting about that is that the reason why he decided to start Deno was because he was taking a look at a lot of the stuff that he had done with Node.js, and it's like, if I had this to do all over again, I think I'd have a window object. I would support web APIs. There's a bunch of stuff that wasn't in Node that he thought should have been in Node, and a lot of this stuff, you just kind of, if you tried to add it, you'd wind up breaking, the whole ecosystem that's already out there. So he decided to do something, start something from scratch. And so they started that project about 6 years ago. They went 1.0 about 4 years ago. Now, one of the big change that's come around this time around is that, they do actively, they're planning on fully supporting like the whole Node ecosystem. So that's the big change between 1.0 and 2.0. Something else that's kind of cool about Deno is that they have a zero config runtime. So if you want to be able to run, testing or run, run linting or a formatter like Prettier or stuff like that, a lot of this stuff is already built in. You don't have to configure anything. It's just there ready to go. They have native TypeScript support, so you don't have to do a TS config. Everything's written in Rust, and they've added support for all the web API entities like window and fetch. So anything, any feature that technically is in the browser, you should be able to use inside of Deno as well. And the other thing that's interesting about Deno is that they have all these security features built into the project. So by default, it's just kind of like a simple sandbox. But if you want to access the file system or you want to access the network, you have to explicitly tell Deno that you want to do that. It won't just do that. So you can write an application, for example, that may have access to like the internet, but it may not have access to the file system, as an example. So that's one of the big differences here. So what's new in 2.0? So as I was talking about before, the biggest thing is really backwards compatibility with Node.js. And I should put an asterisk there because like Bun, for example, they call themselves a drop-in replacement for Node.js, and it really isn't. So there's certain projects that you can't run in Bun, like Next.js is an example of a project you can't run in Bun. And so node compatibility is really the thing that they were going for with 2.0. Something else that they've also done is they've added commercial support and LTS support. So now they're going to have like an LTS version of Deno, just like they do with Node.js. And so they'll most likely have like an upstream or a beta branch that you can start playing around with, but they're going to have a long-term support branch. So Deno 2.0 right now, I think would be considered their LTS, their current LTS branch. They've also added support for node modules and package.json. So they actually already have a configuration file. It's called Deno.json. But if you're working with a node project and you want to use Deno as the engine, they'll work with the package.json. Some other cool features are they actually have a standard library. So, Node.js does not have a standard library. And but you can actually use the standard library in Node.js if you wanted to. Something else they've also added as part of this release was workspace support, which is becoming more and more important. And they also have package management's also built into the tool as well. So that's one of the things that's, you can do with Bun as an example, is it's also a package manager. And you can do the same thing with Deno. So it's kind of like an all-in-one, it's a one file that essentially does everything you need it to do. So to install this, there's multiple different ways you can install Deno. If you're using Windows, you can use Choco or Choco, however you pronounce that. On the Mac or Linux, you can also use Brew. There's a cargo install if you want to install Deno as part of like a Rust project. And you can also just do a curl, install it that way. And then on Windows, you can do a IRM, IEX type command as well. So I'm going to put all this stuff up on the, I'm going to put the slides up on the meetup site. So all this stuff, you'll have access to all this stuff. Like I was talking about before, they have a whole security flags that you can set up. So when you're going to, run your code, let's say you want to access the internet, you can just say --allow -net, or you can do --allow -net equals a specific domain. So you can actually restrict the traffic through one domain. So if for whatever reason somebody's able to, hijack or inject some type of code or whatever into your application, the only website they'd be able to access is, the website you're set up to allow to read or write to. They also have allow read and allow write for being able to read off the file system, write to the file system. And they also have allow -env for being able to work with and read environment variables. And then they also have a one catch-all. If you want to basically blow away all of your security, you can just do -- allow all. They also have a pretty good CLI tool built into Deno as well. So if you just want to run, any JavaScript file, as an example, you can do Deno run and the name of the file. But they want to have all of these different tools and stuff that are built into Deno. So for instance, like I mentioned Prettier before, they have an FMT command line that you can use that will actually format your code for you. So if you have code that's not formatted properly, you can use the FMT command to do that. Something that's not new, they've actually had this in the tool for a while, is a compile feature. So you can actually take your Deno application and you can actually compile it into an executable. And not only can you compile it into an executable, you can compile it into an executable for different platforms. So if let's say you're on the Mac and you wanted to create like an exe file for Windows, you can do that. They have a linter that's also built into it as well. And they also have an install command that you can use for installing your external modules. So if you are using a package.json, you can install external modules that way. And then they also have a watch flag that you can do. So if you're making changes to a file and you want to update in real time, it will do that for you. So I've got all kinds of really cool features and stuff that are just built in to the existing CLI. Other features are the zero config support. So all this stuff, you don't have to do any configuration to start taking advantage of this. If you need to go and tweak certain settings and stuff, you can. But if you just want to run, your JavaScript application without having to have any config files, you can do that as well. They also have a standard library I mentioned before. So the thing that's kind of neat about that is if you think about that from the standpoint of, does anybody here remember Left Pad Apocalypse? Nope. Well, a couple of us do. So there's all these like teeny little, modules and stuff like that that people have put up on NPM over the years. And, when Left Pad Apocalypse happened, what happened was that there was somebody that had a module name that they did not have the rights to. And so there was a company that owned the name and it was a trademark. And so they went to NPM and said, hey, we've asked this guy repeatedly that, owns this module that, we could have it. We offered to pay him. He won't do it. So we're going to do a trademark and get it that way. And the developer who did that was so angry that he lost the module name that he removed all of his modules off of NPM. And one of the modules he had on there was Left Pad, and Left Pad, all it does is add spaces to the left of a string. And it turned out there's a lot of tools, including Babel, that use that. And so when he yanked the project, instantly all these different projects on the internet failed all at one time, and it became a huge train wreck. And NPM actually had to change their policies after that happened. So one of the things that's nice here is that, there's certain functions and stuff like that. So for instance, like Lodash is an example. Lodash is a library. It's very popular in JavaScript. A lot of people use for working with collections. And so what they've done is in the standard library, essentially they've put all those functions and stuff inside the standard library. So if you need to work with lists or arrays and stuff like that, there's a @std/arrays namespace that you can pull in and use different functions and stuff inside of there. So one of the things that I actually, my current job, we're still using Node.js for everything, but I've started looking at actually using the standard library for a lot of this functionality. So rather than go through and, download these different, packages that, may have security problems or have other problems, if there's a standard library you can use to have this functionality, I think that's a huge asset for the community. So the cool thing is, even if you're not using Deno, you can still use these. Features. Like I mentioned before, there's a Deno.json file that you can use for configuring your Deno applications, and they also added something pretty cool. I think maybe about 5 or 6 months ago, called the JSR. And the JSR is essentially it's a module repository, but for modern JavaScript. So think of it as being a much better version of NPM. It doesn't have the number of modules in it that NPM. The NPM is like well over 2 million modules that are there in NPM, but it's meant to be, they have certain rules that they have to do before you can before you can push the module up to JSR. And another really cool feature, which this is new in Deno 2, is they have workspaces and monorepo support as well. So it's another nice feature. So something else that's pretty nice, and this has been a feature of Deno since the very beginning, is that they treat TypeScript as a first-class language. And so, you can just write a TypeScript file and execute it. And so they have type checking built into the tool. And the reason why I put this into the presentation is that a feature they just recently added into Node was the ability to strip the typing. So if you have TypeScript code, but you want to run it as JavaScript code, they have a feature that will essentially just strip out the types from your JavaScript code, and it'll be able to execute your TypeScript as if it were JavaScript. So that's good. The only thing is that it doesn't have any checking built into it for the types. And so one of the things you do get with Deno is that you can do type checking, which is important because, if you're using one type that doesn't go where another one's supposed to go, that can cause problems. And so they also have a way that you can check the JS doc code snippets. So the way that a lot of people are doing their typing on their JavaScript is with JS doc code snippets. And so they can check that as well with Deno. So they've got some pretty cool checking features as well. You can also check against DOM objects, and they also have support for the .d.ts type files. All right, so module support. So Deno now has support for NPM, the Node APIs, along with JSR and the standard library. So if you want to import into a let's say into your Deno application, but use NPM, all you have to do is put a NPM colon prefix at the beginning of your the from part of your import statement, and it will use NPM to actually grab that module. They do have CommonJS and CGS support now as well. And they do support both the Deno.json and the package.json files for creating your modules. So I don't know how well everybody can read this, but this is an example of a TypeScript file here. And if you look at this, I don't know how familiar everybody here is with TypeScript, but one of the things you'll notice here is in this function, there's a parameter called thing, but then after the colon, they have specified a type called string. And so now you can kind of create a file that looks like this and then export out these different interfaces. And then inside of, let's say, your main.ts, if you're creating a Deno project from scratch, one of the things they'll do is they'll create like a main.ts file and also a main_test.ts file. So if you're looking at this one here, it's importing in that say hello function that we saw from the previous screen here. And then what it's doing here is that it's importing that in, and you can import the whole module or just one function from it. But if we look down below, they also have this camel case function that they're importing in from this JSR library. So here's an example of where they're actually pulling in a module from JSR. And you can also directly reference different APIs and stuff like that. Rather than pull it from a repository, you can actually, if let's say the location of where the file is, let's say on GitHub as an example, you can actually directly reference that file from GitHub and pull it down and do it that way as well. So they have multiple different ways that you can pull down modules and module code. You're not limited to just NPM or JSR. So as far as handling the imports, they have NPM for NPM modules. If you just want to use like a Node API as an example, you can just preface that with Node : and then use any of the Node specific APIs in that way. They also have a Deno for Deno specific APIs. And they also have a JSR one for that. But the key point here is that you can basically import from anywhere. As far as the node modules folder support, Deno does not use node modules folder by default. So there is a folder generally where it gets cached. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's in your generally on the Mac. I believe it's in the library folder. They keep a Deno folder where they cache all the modules. So when you're pulling down your modules and stuff like that, it will install it this one location, and then all of your Node applications will use that. Some Node projects like Next.js and Felt require a Node modules file, so they do support that as well. And then if you want to create a Node modules folder, all you have to do is specify --node-modules-dir. And then what I'll do is that here they say auto, and then so as you're going to run this application, it actually will take a look and see which modules that are required in your application and automatically pull them down. So you don't have to do a separate npm install to install your modules like you do with Node. As you go to run this for the first time, it'll pull down whatever modules that you need when you go to run it for the first time. You can also specify a node modules directory in the Deno.json file. And then you can there's two settings, auto or manual, that you can use for that. So I mentioned the standard library before, and here's some examples of different modules that you can use with the standard library. They've got an assert library, cache library, a bytes library, collections, which kind of like a replacement for Lodash. They have a formatting library, front matter, and many, many more. These are just some examples of different things they have, but they have a net library, an HTML library that you can use. And so what I'd suggest doing is, like, if you're starting to build a new application or add new features to an existing application, and you want to use a standard library, I'd take a look and see what's available. And just try to use from the standard library. So I'll give you a perfect example. The other day, I needed to use kebab casing for creating like endpoints that would work as URLs. And I looked in here, and sure enough, I believe it was in the text library, or the standard /text library inside of the standard library, there was a kebab function that you can use inside of there. So they're generally, most of the modules there, since it's part of the standard library, they've been tested and they're considered to be, pretty foolproof. So it's you're pretty safe going with the standard library. Something else I was going to mention here is that depending on the age of the library, there's going to be varying levels of stability. So something that's brand new is probably not going to be as stable as something that's been in there for 4 years. And all this stuff is also available in JSR. So if you want to include this, you can do a npm rc file, add the JSR there, and then bring them in that way as well. So that kind of brings us to this part, JSR versus npm. So JSR, it stands for the JavaScript Registry for Open Source Packages. Like I mentioned before, npm has the most modules, but also has a lot of legacy issues and security concerns. JSR has TypeScript and ESM support at the very top. And so by default, they don't support CGS. So if you have a lot of code, or you have a module that you might want to upload there that's using CommonJS, they don't support that. It's supposed to be modern JavaScript. So it's ESM only if you want to publish to the JSR. Another cool feature about the JSR is that it automatically generates documentation for you. So let's say you haven't written any documentation for your module, it will automatically generate documentation for you as well. Something else that you have to take in consideration when you're going to reference extensions. So one of the things that Node's kind of lazy about is that you don't necessarily have to put the extension at the end of the path when you're importing in. So this is something I've gotten pretty used to inside of React projects. You'll reference a path that has a .ts, but when it gets transpiled into JavaScript, it then say .js. And so generally what they do is you don't put that in there when you're writing your React code. It just automatically assumes that it's going to be using a .js file once it gets transpiled. So with a Node, they're a little bit stricter about that. You do have to specifically, or they encourage you to use an extension where you're going to reference stuff when you're running Deno, but they do require it to have the correct extension when you publish the JSR. And you can actually also import NPM packages to your JSR packages. So that's an option as well. And they have full support for namespaces and workspaces. So Deno also has a lot of built-in APIs. So they have a Deno.serve if you want to serve up HTTP, it even does HTTPS, which is pretty cool. They have Deno.open for opening and reading files, Deno.connect for connecting to a TCP service. They also have an import.meta object that you can use to pull like URL properties from your application. And you can also, it'll tell you whether or not you're in the main module or not, as an example. And they also support FFI functions for calling native code. So let's say you have like a C or a Rust library that you want to be able to use inside of your application. You can actually access that using FFI inside of Deno. Something else, I don't have if I have any slides about this, but something else they've also done in Deno is that they've also tried with their node compatibility, they've also tried to make sure that they're also compatible with native modules as well. So if you have native modules that reference, native code as an example, for the most part, those should work. There's going to be a couple exceptions to that. So for instance, like with SQLite as an example, SQLite, the module that you normally use for SQLite with Node.js, they actually leverage and use some a bunch of Node APIs that are standard Node APIs, but they also reference and use some methods, I believe, from I'm trying to remember what the name of the library is. There's a library that's used for handling all the multi-threading inside of Node, and they use a separate library called Tokyo inside of Deno for managing that stuff, and so because of that module will not work inside of Deno. So something else that's kind of cool about Deno is that they support all the standard web APIs. So if you're using the Fetch API or the workers or web storage, it's all supported in Deno. And as I mentioned before, they also have support for all the Node APIs. So if you want to use, let's say, the built-in OS, path, query string, stream, crypto, it's important, assert, all that stuff is accessible and usable inside of Deno now. So that's really what's providing, I think, most of the Node.js compatibility inside of Deno is that they've chosen to support the stuff that are considered to be the standard APIs that are part of Node. So, one of the issues that I know like Bun has with being able to run a lot of the Node projects is that at least the last time I checked, this has been a couple months ago, like they don't support the crypto library. Well, that's kind of important if you want to do stuff like connect to a database, as an example. So like Postgres, if you want to use Postgres as an example, it's using the PG module, and NPM as an example uses the crypto library. And so that's why a lot of stuff in Node will just break and won't work correctly under Bun. So I will preface that one of the last bullet points I had on this slide was that node compatibility is a 1.0 feature. So this is really something, if you want to start using, it's something you're going to have to test and verify, make sure that it's working correctly. So one of the things you can also do is if you want to change the default settings for transcompiling, let's say your JSX, you can set up compiler options inside of your config file. And I have an example here on on the right-hand side of how you configure it to use JSX. And they do support basically everything React 17 and above, because those added the new JSX transforms. And so you can add those features and stuff with the following settings. And at least they also have an override for Preact settings if you're using Preact. So Deno also supports most of the major frameworks. And so I think this is one of the big differences between Bun and Deno right now, is that right out of the gate, they support Express, Svelte, Next.js, Remix, Astro. There's a bunch of other frameworks here that I didn't put here, but these are the big ones right now. And so when I say support, what I mean by that is that everything should work just fine when you're going to run this in Deno, but you may experience or have a problem. Like I mentioned before, like there's the issue with SQLite as an example. And so that's why they have the commercial support now, because if a commercial customer, for example, runs into something that's supposed to be supported and it's not working or whatever, they'll fix it. So for the rest of us, though, I think we could submit a bug, but unless you're a commercial customer, I don't think you get the same level of support. But the key thing here is this is an example of where you really have to kind of test this stuff. And I'll do a demo a little bit, kind of demonstrating how this stuff works. So like I was saying before, they do have this commercial support that they do. You can also get regular community support through a Discord channel and Stack Overflow. If Stack Overflow is still online when we finish this meeting. And they also have this enterprise commercial support. So if you're an enterprise, they also offer a support plan for that as well. So outside of that, they also offer hosting services. And so that seems to be the kind of the direction a lot of these companies are going now. It's like, hey, here's this really cool framework that you can use. It's like, oh, how do I host it? It's like, no problem. You can host it with us. So one of the things that they're doing now is they do provide really good documentation on how to get this running on most of the cloud providers. So if you're using GCD or DigitalOcean, AWS, Cloudflare, they offer support. And I think actually behind the scenes, a lot of these companies like Cloudflare, for example, when they're going to run like their cloud functions, an example, I believe they've already been using Deno. So I believe like Netlify and Cloudflare already are using Deno in production. They also have a kind of like a generic Docker container you can use. And so when you're going through and looking at the instructions on how to host Deno, generally the way they do that is through a Docker container. And so as I mentioned before, they do have their own hosting. And if you're going to use their hosting, they actually have a command that gets installed when you install Deno called deploy_ctl. And you can actually use that to take your Node application and then push it up to Deno. And they also have really good documentations on how to do your CI integration. So if you're doing CI/CD, they provide documentation on how to get this up and running with that as well. So their hosting really kind of comes down to three different categories. They have free hosting, they have pro hosting, they have enterprise plans. The free hosting is obviously free, but the pro plan is like $20 a month. They have a enterprise contract, or they were supposed to contact them for the enterprise pricing. And then with the free and pro, you're limited to about 50 milliseconds per request. And so what they're going to do is if you have something that takes longer than 50 milliseconds, they're just going to kill it. So that might be one of the reasons why you might want to go with a different hosting provider. And they both the free and the pro allow custom domains. So you could potentially deploy your application to Deno, host it for free, and then also, have a domain with it. So that's kind of a neat feature there, but not if it takes longer than 50 milliseconds. So this is technically a beta feature, is they have Jupyter support now. And so they have this -- unstable flag because it's still kind of a beta thing right now at this point. And this all assumes that you already have Jupyter set up and running. So if you are running Python, you've got Jupyter Notebook set up, you can actually run this. You can actually create notebooks that have JavaScript in them now. And you can actually run this inside of VS Code as well. This is another cool feature about Jupyter Notebooks is that you can actually run inside of VS Code, whether you're using Deno or not. They also have their own framework. So let's say I don't want to use Express or Remix or one of these other frameworks. They have one that's built basically on top of Deno. So it's meant to be a modern JavaScript framework. It comes with Tailwind and a plugin API. And they also are using the island architecture. For those that weren't here at last month's Astro, Astro, I think, really kind of like promoted this idea of having these little islands inside of your web page example, where you can, if you want to run Preact in one island and React in another island, and just have static HTML over here, you can do all this stuff all at this on the same page, and so they support that with Fresh. And so they also have another cool feature where they can stream the HTML from the server. And the reason why that's kind of cool, anybody that's used or played around with a lot of these AI applications, it's very common for those applications, especially as it takes a really long time to get the results back, they'll start streaming the results back over the web page. So they do have streaming support, built into the server as well, and they also have support for partials as well. So let's get down to the dirty business here. Node.js versus Deno. Can actually use Deno in production. So this is my opinion, but Deno, I think, has better support for web APIs, web standards. Deno also has support for multiple different module repositories. Generally, you can do this with Node as well, but just right out of the box, it's like you can use GSR if you want to. You can use a standard library. You can use NPM. They support all the major repositories. They both use V8 for their JavaScript engine, which is really kind of like the gold standard for JavaScript execution. And Deno offers support for all the major frameworks. So like I mentioned before, this is a kind of like a buyer beware thing. Not everything's gonna work. So an example of this is Clerk. I don't know how many people are familiar with Clerk. Clerk is a service, an API that you can use for doing all your authentication in your applications. And a lot of people, especially when they're building up a brand new application, rather than go and write all that stuff from scratch, they choose to use a service like that to handle all their authentication. Well, because of the way that some of the security stuff inside of Clerk is working, it's not compatible yet with Deno, but I'm sure Deno at least is working on making sure that something like that will work with Deno. So this is the kind of stuff that you have to test to make sure. And it's also great if you just want to write Deno specific apps. So if you're starting from scratch, I think this is an example of something where it might make sense to use Deno. So that being said, I'm still primarily using Node for everything myself, but I really like a lot of the new features and stuff that are in Deno. And there's maybe some places where we can use it. My current job, like testing. We were just talking about testing before. They've got a really great testing framework built into it as well. So so it's something to take a look at. So with that, let's go ahead and do some demos here. So the first thing I want to show, since we were talking about like trying to get some of these different Node applications to be able to run, this is the documentation site on for Deno. And by the way, this is also on GitHub. And something they encourage people to do is, if you want to create your own examples, you can create examples, submit it to them as a pull request, and they'll send you stickers. So so cool. If you're looking to get like Deno stickers, that'd be a good way to do it. But in this example here, they have examples here of how you create a React app from scratch, how you create a Vue app from scratch, and they also have like a Next app. So I'm just gonna come over here, I'm gonna copy this command, and if you look at this, what this is doing essentially is doing like an npm command, but from Deno. So I'm just gonna come out here, and we'll call this our Deno next example. So let me just paste that in there. There we go. And run that, and it did not find my project. So let me try opening up a new tab. All right. And let's try this again. All right, so we're gonna call this, let's call this JaxNode, or let's call this Deno next. And yeah. And yes, I want to use TypeScript. I want to use ESLint. I want to use Tailwind. I want to use the source directory, use the app router. And we can sit there and wait for it to install all the modules. All right. So now I can come over here. I can go into that Deno next. And I should be able to do Deno task run. What does it say here? Test dev. So let's see what happens. And it says it started up. So let's try going there. And well, there's our Next.js app running under Deno. So I'm gonna go ahead and kill that. All right, and come back out. And let's take a look at some Deno examples here. All right, so I believe I already have this open in Visual Studio Code. So this is an example they actually gave. If you go and watch the full video from what I was showing earlier from Deno, Reindel actually sits down at the keyboard and starts writing some code, and this is very similar to some of the examples here that he was writing. But if we look at this, this is a tree function that will go through and take a look at a directory and recursively kind of go through and look at all the different files and stuff that are inside of a directory. So in order to run this, all I have to do is say Deno run ls. Now, what's interesting, if I just go ahead and run this right now, we're going to get a warning, and it's going to say error module not found. And that's because we didn't specify a name for the module. So one of the things you can do is you can use this flag unstable sloppy imports if you're not giving the correct file extension. So I'll just go ahead and give the file extension here. And we should get another warning here. And so the warning here is saying, like, hey, you didn't explicitly give permissions, right? This is going to be reading the file system. So we at least need to be able to have like an allow read as an example to do this. So I'm just going to see if I can't kill this. And let's try this again. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to say -- allow read. And there, it works.
And I assume you can put it at the end as well, right?
Let's try that. So I'm just going to go ahead and try putting that in. Nope. Yeah, I put it before the file name. So, but you can also at this point you can also just say a, and I'll run it that way as well. And it's kind of important when you're actually going to, let's say, build and deploy. Let's say you wanted to compile this into an executable. So one of the things I did was, if you look up right up here, I've got this Deno ls and Deno ls.exe. And essentially what those are Mac and Linux versions, but they are essentially executables. So if I were to come here and see here, try to open that.
Can you just like open dot?
Go and find her. Here we go. So here we go. So if we look at this, you can see this is actually an executable. This is a .exe file. And if you look at the file sizes here, you can see that this one here is 68.2 megabytes. The Windows one is 82.5 megabytes. I'm not sure why the Windows one requires so much more stuff to be able to run. But if I want to run this as a executable without Deno, as an example, I can say Deno ls, and it runs there. So when I'm going to compile that, if I want to compile that so that it will do the reading, I also have to use that allow read when I go to compile the application. So the permissions even apply when you're going to run these other tools. So something else that's kind of nice is that, you know, you get TypeScript right out of the box. And one of the things you'll notice here is that I can run all this stuff and I don't have a tsconfig file in my directory. It just runs right out of the box. And they have support built in for certain things. So for instance, like right here, I have a TCP listener. This is like a client, or yeah, this is more of a server. This is a server that's doing text decoding. And then I also have this one right here for basically just doing a ping off of that server. So if I come right over here, and if I want to, I can say Deno, and we'll say -a, and TCP listener.ts. And I've just,
-8 for,
I'm sorry?
what's the -8 for?
It's basically, I'm just throwing caution to the wind. I'm allowing everything. I'm allowing it to read,
Oh, it's
read and write to any place in the file system and go to, you know. But if I wanted to, I could have specified allow net equals, you know, localhost as an example. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over here and these Deno examples, and I'm gonna run the TCP ping. So I'm gonna say Deno ping TS, and I believe I also need to do a allow net. And you can see right there in the console below that I received the ping. So there I was just very easily able to create a TCP server and then a client and be able to ping the server. So that is about all I had for the demo. I was going to just show the Deno.json file, what that looks like. They have this idea of tasks. So what's cool about this is that I can say, I'll just go ahead and kill this server. And I can say Deno task dev. And there, it just ran this. But the thing that's cool about this is that I can actually go into that file. So here, main.ts. And let's say I want to change this. Let's say I want to make this 5. And it just restarted and it gave me the new number, but of course I didn't change it here. So there we go. So it's basically, it's updating us the command line here using that watch parameter or flag. All right. So that is all I had for the demos. Are there any questions? Yes.
Kind of an interesting question, but you know that Node.js has things like, you know, service work tools and things like that. How has Deno improved on that a bit, or have they, or is it still kind of the same model?
So they do have support for workers, and so I haven't looked at the worker API in Node in a while, but I know that one of the things they're doing with Deno is that they're supporting the web API specifically. And something else is different. I was trying to remember the name of the library that they use in Node for doing all of the synchronous stuff. And so, you know, there's a run loop in Node as an example, and all of the real power of Node really comes from being able to handle, like, you know, tens of thousands of requests at the same time, because what it does is it's something that's it's a long running process. It basically just creates a handle for that, and then waits for the result, but you can still go on and process other things because it's running inside of a run loop. So they do something very similar on the Deno side, but they use a library called Tokyo, which is a Rust library. So it's basically, it's a Rust version of the Node library. So Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah,
Can you go back to that Deno.json? Last example.
absolutely, yeah.
So you have an import section here. Is that something that you manually manage to add imports, or does that get built when you add an import to one of your JS or ES files?
Let's try an experiment. Let's see what happens. I'm gonna kill this right here. To answer your question, I'm not sure, but I'm gonna try doing something here real quick. I'm gonna do a Deno install, and I'm gonna say Lodash at latest. And let's see what happens. All right, and it didn't work because I didn't give it a prefix. So I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna say,
Well, you specify registry.
you specify the registry first. Voila, I just added it. So, yeah, I think that's the key thing here is that this is like essentially your dependencies. And the thing that's interesting here is that if I can remember where the folder was for storing all the cast modules, one of the things you could do is that you go and you can delete that folder as an example. And if I were to go to run this again, and it had this requirement here, they'll go and install this stuff. There's a module that you're using, like for instance, I can specify the import directly inside of my inside of a file, and it will go and download that the first time you go to run it. So even if you've not done a Deno install, it will go and do it at runtime when you go to run it. So that's another neat feature.
With JSR now, the same package, will it say it's already installed?
So Lodash, as far as I know, is not on JSR. Let's double check that. I'm not sure I'm correct about that. Let's do this, JSR. So to get to JSR, you just go to jsr.io. So I'm gonna say Lodash. So this comes in, I think there's a real, there's a couple different Lodash. This looks like a Lodash library here. I'm not sure if it's the.
It's got like a Chinese. Yeah, that's not important. That's it. Got a 52% score.
So here's the important thing here. I was going to mention is that I was mentioning the standard library before, and one thing that's cool about that, one of the things that Lodash is really good at is working with collections. If you're doing any type of functional stuff with collections, Lodash, it's really good about managing things, putting things in one stream and the other, and that sort of thing. But with this standard library, you may not need to use Lodash, right? And so one of the things that I think has become, this is one of the nice things and one of the bad things about having NPM. NPM, you can pretty much go and find, any type of library that you want to do anything. And so one of the things that's pretty common that I used to see a lot of is there's a library that's used pretty commonly for working with dates and times and Node or specifically NPM. And I used to use it quite a bit. But if you go and think about it, it's like you can probably do most of what you need to do just using the date object inside of JavaScript versus coming up with adding like a specialized date time library in that.
You mean the data finesse, right?
I'm sorry?
The library is called data finesse.
No, there's a different, I'm forgetting what the name of it is, but I used to use it quite a bit in a lot of my early Node projects, but it's like, I forget how big the module is, but it's like if you go and look at modules that you're bringing in, a lot of times you're not just bringing in that module, you're bringing in like all the modules and stuff that it uses as well, and then you're bringing in all the modules. There was this horrible thing they used to tell people about AIDS, which is you got to be careful who you sleep with because you're sleeping with everybody they've ever slept with, which is it's such a messed up thing to say to people, but that's actually kind of like the way NPM is, because and when you go to use a module from NPM, you're also using any module that it's importing as well, and then any modules it's importing.
Actually, Lodash installs some stuff.
Once you install one dash, it brings it along.
Yeah. So this is a very common thing. It's not just with Node and NPM, but this is all ecosystems. So for instance, like, Python, there's all kinds of libraries and stuff that you can import and start using.
But Python, you can specify what part of the library you're bringing in.
Yeah. But I mean, like, so a better example would be like Maven or NuGet or one of those types of projects where if you're working with .NET or Java, for example, it's like they have all these different libraries that you can just specify in your, in your project file. So, oh yeah, I'm using these projects. And so one of the common problems I remember we used to have at previous .NET shops, when NuGet first came out, it's like the developers like, oh, I can pull down this project, I can pull down, this library and stuff like that and start using this. It's like, hey, you guys, have you started looked at the licensing for some of these packages? And a lot of times, there's like, it's like, well, if you're a company of this size and this many people and stuff like that, it's like, we expect, royalties, or if you're making changes, you want commits and stuff like that. There's a lot of times there's different restrictions with the licensing, and you have to be really careful about what you import and use and stuff like that. So having a standard library that does most of the stuff that you need to do, I think is a great starting point. And I think that's one of the best contributions I think they've made, Deno has. Is even if you don't use Deno, you can still use their standard library. So yeah.
Clarifying question on the dependencies again. So if you just add, let's say, Lodash, npm Lodash or whatever to a file, when you build with Deno, it will go out and import that. It will go out and fetch that package.
Yes, if it's not already installed, it will go install it when you go to run it.
Curious what would happen if you specify like different versions of things, different files.
So
right outside the,
yeah, I think I like I said, I have to take a look at the actual cache folder where they use that, but I believe they use the specific like version number. So if you're bringing down like version 2.0.3 as an example, stuff like that, it will specify that in the folder. That's if I remember correct, I did look at it one time, but it's been a while since I've looked at the cache folder. But yeah, that's also something that like at my current job, it's like, a lot of times people use like a little caret in front of the version number for their modules, and you got to be careful about that because like you may be pulling in like a newer version where you go to do your CI/CD that breaks something in the application. So we explicitly use like a very specific like version number when we're importing in our modules. So we don't just bring in any modules. It's like there's a discussion that has to happen before we start using a new module in our applications.
They had the problem with Firebase. They changed versions and there were some breaking changes.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
It is very nice.
Yeah.
Took me a while to figure it out.
Yeah, so I always love it when you go to open up a project that last time you ran it ran fine, and then you go to run it again, and then it stops working for some mysterious reason. Yeah, and it's like, it just breaks. And that's one of the things, that was a very common problem I had with React Native. It's like React Native is very finicky because there's so much different tooling that goes into getting it to work correctly. It's very easy for, in my experience at least, it's very easy for React Native projects to break. And specifically like when you're pushing stuff up to like a CI/CD type service, it's like it's very common for it's like, oh, now this thing's not working correctly or it's not pulling down the right version of this. So you gotta be extra special careful. So having stuff that just works is nice. All right. Yeah.
classic experience, CI, talking about old projects is, you have a project you haven't built, we haven't developed in a while, and you go and push it to whatever CI you're using. And that doesn't work anymore because, usually it's used some kind of containerization of it, but whatever images it's using are later than what you were using before, and so there's build issues.
Yes, yeah. So I'm fortunate, my current job, I have somebody else that really kind of deals for a lot of that stuff, but I still think I had to do a lot of my last two jobs. I did a lot of the CI/CD stuff, and last two companies, it's like we had a lot of React Native. So yeah, the native stuff was generally pretty good. We didn't have too many problems with like the stuff that was just written in Swift or Java. So, all right.
What do they exactly mean by using modern JS in that fresh, JSR?
Yeah, so the key thing is that they're using all like the modern features. The main stuff is like they're using, import from ESM syntax. I believe that their example of like a JavaScript verse. I think the key thing, the main reason they probably built it is they wanted to have a framework that worked really well under Deno, because at the time it's like you couldn't run Next and you couldn't run some of these other frameworks and stuff under like Express. You couldn't run Express under Deno. Now you can. So.
I wouldn't call Express modern.
Well, 5.0 just came out, so it only took 10 years, but they did come out with a new version. So Express, I mean, there's still a lot of people that use Express, and so there's another thing we're just talking about. It's like, people introduce these breaking changes and stuff like that. Express has been one of those things. It's like, it's just reliable and works, and so that's why a lot of people, I think, still use it and still, do a lot of development with Express, because it's kind of like it's kind of like a web forms application. It's like, they haven't made any improvements to it in 10 years, so it's just gonna the same code's just gonna work. So. All right, well, that is all I had. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the present, or at least the online portion of the presentation. And I just want to, before I do that, I want to thank our sponsor, Availity, for sponsoring us tonight. And thank everybody for coming out, and I will see you guys next year.